Tony back again from our Talking Remote. Got some fantastic guests as usual this week. I have Arushi, Kumar and John Tooth from Flowmatika with us. How are you guys?
Yeah, good here.
Yeah, doing well.
Great to have you on. Just before we get started, don't forget, you're watching this, join us at remoteaf.co, click the community button and join our fantastic community where we're talking about this and many other things dear to our hearts. Also, if you want to join our newsletter, Teamcraft, you'll find the details in the notes below. Click on those, join us, it'd be great. And now we're going to have a great chat about predicting the future using your data with our friends from Flowmatika. But before we do that, I think it'd be important if we introduced you a little bit. Arushi, would you like to introduce yourself? Ladies first, of course.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, John. So I'm Arushi Kumar. I'm the product manager and designer at Flowmatika.
Fantastic. And yourself, John?
John Tooth, CEO of Flowmatika and Remote AF.
Or as I refer to him as Captain, my captain. But anyway, we shall move on. That's what happens when you let me in the chair and you have to answer to me. So that's good. All right.
Yeah, I really didn't think that through, did I?
No, not really. That's great. All right. You know, the title of this chat today is about predicting the future using data. And of course, you come from Flowmatika, which is a platform that ingests data and allows you to slice and dice it and understand how it comes from that. But before we get into that, I just want to ask the question: how can we predict the future using your data? Is that possible? I might ask you that, John. You like to start with that?
I mean, no one has a strict crystal ball, but I think you can get alarmingly close. I imagine some people that have looked into this, especially when you look at estimating for large-scale and complex projects, you've probably found things like a Monte Carlo estimate or simulation. Those tools are good. And when you start to put them in context of other heuristics that you can build up around your organization, your ability to predict at least the things that will run late becomes incredibly sharp.
I'll pick you up on the Monte Carlo a little bit in a minute because I've got some questions written. Now, what's your thought on that, Arushi, as well?
Yeah, so data is a way for us, I feel, for everybody to use what's happened before, what's historically been the practice, what we've seen happen normally. That becomes always a reference point for us to anticipate what's going to come. So people use it in everyday life, basically. So it's not it's one of the ways to predict the future because it's happened before. Similar things, something close to it, just like John said, it's not a crystal ball that'll tell you exactly what's going to happen, but you can get close to it just by looking at historically what events have taken place, and the data associated with it, for sure.
Okay, so obviously we're talking about the platform Flowmatika, and we're talking about predicting the future and using your data, and Flowmatika ingests data, but that's my simplified version of what Flowmatika is. I think it warrants a little bit more of information from yourselves. Arushi, what is Flowmatika if you were to describe it for a client?
So, simply put, Flowmatika is a data-centric application which helps organizations and businesses take into account the data from the delivery systems and use that insights to optimize or make changes to the delivery systems and processes, and then predict and make it more predictable and more efficient to deliver the values towards whatever accounts to be valuable towards their business.
Great. Do you want to add anything to that, CEO?
I think the way I like to think about Flowmatika is it is the alternative to the abject chaos that tends to destroy well-intended projects. Like when you're doing delivery of anything really, but software is obviously where we're used the most. People like to present things like the complexity of the work or how complicated it is, and neither of those things are necessarily untrue. but that doesn't mean that they're inherently completely unpredictable. And a great example of this is something that happened earlier in my career. Was we had a front end piece that we'd built, and there was a single API call that we needed to make to progress, and it was a hard blocker. Like, we could keep building the face of the application, but if you don't have the ability to retrieve the details from that database, you can't proceed to the next step. So there was kind of like some hard blockers there. And due to more the human complexity that surrounded the project rather than the technical complexity of building a single API, that took 2 years to complete. Like, I had even moved on. I changed jobs twice by the time that one requirement had been finished. And that was an issue which, at least from what I heard back from people that had stayed around in that context, that's an issue that had suffered much more from decision-making anxiety that ultimately probably cost quite a reasonable amount of business value, or at least some opportunity. And it's one of those things where it was pretty much unseen because the requirement just kept getting bounced between teams. And you lose the history and the lineage of what happened there. You don't see that it's something that hasn't been finished for like 400 days. Like, that sounds like lunacy if you're talking about like a team level deliverable, right? It's like, it's just been sitting there for 400 days, not deprioritized, always being worked on, but never being finished. And it's those kinds of, sort of hidden elements of chaos that happen in a large delivery system that Flowmatika makes easy to identify, easy to find, and provides you some guidance, even to a limited degrees at the moment, and hopefully a lot more soon, around like what you can do about it.
Okay, so let's dig a little bit deeper on that, because I think it's worthy of saying, well, what how Flowmatika actually does that. Yeah, and then we can dig deeper on the uses for it. So, Arushi, can you sort of describe for me, what are the attributes that Flowmatika does that allows you to do what John's describing, to disseminate and slice the data?
Yeah, so what it does is Flowmatika connects to organizations' work management system, whatever they're using currently. Usually there's Jira and ADO that we support, and there's more to come for sure. But we plug into that, and that's where all the source lies. So we fetch the data associated to those work items, that is the work that is divided into pieces, deliverables that have been put into cards within those systems. We fetch the journey of those cards from the idea all the way to when it was completed and delivered, and use the data associated to that journey, bring it into Flowmatika, build some intelligence around it, create calculations and things that people were doing via Excel sheets or to manual calculations. Remove all that and just present you the insights that you can now use, clear metrics that you can now use to visually see or get indications of what's happening in your system, in your business. How's work being delivered from the idea, the conception of the idea, and then putting it into your delivery system, and then delivering it to your customers or towards your business. And those are in the form of either flow metrics or just in terms performance metrics or performance indicators. And there are certain graphs as well that you can use to, get a visual understanding of what's the state of play.
Brilliant. John, any thoughts you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think just to expand a little bit on what Arushi was saying around the relationship between Flowmatika and spreadsheets. Like, if I was to ask you, what is your end-to-end lead time on average for a team based on the past 3 months of the work that you've done? How much of it is bugs versus value delivered versus coordination activity, etc. If I was to ask you a bunch of questions of that nature, in an instance where you don't have this kind of tool, you're probably going to need to go away, crunch some numbers in a spreadsheet after exporting a bunch of data out of a workflow management tool, maybe you can get a little bit of value out of, sort of running some custom queries in your workflow management tool. Or alternatively, you can kind of press a button and it just shows you everything. Like that's kind of like, for me, that's having been in the position before where I've had to answer some of those questions and I haven't had the tools to do those. And it's one of those things like when you talk about delay and waste in an organization, suddenly that kind of number crunching and trying to extrapolate and understand, and so sometimes it's not even someone of a data background doing it. Like I'll put my hand up, I wasn't, but it's one of those things that you're accelerating all of that, anxiety and like retrofitting information into this one Excel template you borrowed off someone else, like all that kind of stuff. It just goes away, and you can just look at the information and start accelerating yourself to the position where you get to talk about, okay, what are the things we need to change here? Like that thing's red and blinking at me. That seems bad. Maybe I should do something about that.
Okay, so that's the real-time sort of entity of it, right? So as you're talking about the real-time entry of the data and being able to do that, but we also talk about the predictive capability of it as well. And you're talking about Monte Carlo. So I told you I'd get back around to picking up on the Monte Carlo type predictive energy of it, right? So a lot of applications have Monte Carlo built into them. So what's the differential in Flowmatika that makes Monte Carlo so powerful to predict the future? Arushi, I might start with you.
Flowmatika provides Monte Carlo along with certain it allows you to do certain what if analysis that you can. It takes into account your delivery rate. It can tell you if you based off what is currently happening in your system, if you go by it, what's your predictability going to look like. But if you have a bit more understanding of your of the context of your scenario, of what's the human side of things, the other things that cannot be shown in data, or it cannot be shown through calculations or just looking at data. There's more understanding of how things are delivering. Are they doing work fast or slow, or are they is the work associated to this particular project has fully been identified? We just need to start proceeding and start working on it, or there's a lot of planning left to it, or there's still a bit more unknown. So we still need to probe around what's going to happen. So based on that understanding, you can create those what if analysis or situations, mark those, and feed that into the simulation to get an accurate reading, to have an understanding of what's the fantastical situation, what's my fantasy world looking like, and what's the reality looking like. And that clarity often helps us have a better understanding of those predictabilities by leveraging Monte Carlo.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you is it's a lot more configurable than most of those kind of applications.
Yeah.
John, adding to that from your point of view, I guess from what I'd like to hear from your point of view, because you deal with that, is what does it give executives and leaders more than most Monte Carlo?
Well, I think for me, so and just to back up for anyone that's not specifically familiar with Monte Carlo, and I'll talk to what happens in Flowmatika at a high level rather than I don't know how Monte Carlo is executed in other applications, but basically we take a sample set of your data, churn it through somewhere between 150 to 250 different simulations around, usually based on history, what has happened, all those work items, when they all land, and if you sequence them in different ways, what's the result, right? And then we compare that to the existing list of work items that you've got that you're interested in interrogating. We also look at the team composition and how much time that team is realistically spending working on this piece of value for you. And the reason that we like to think about that is I am sure that I'm not the only person that's had to decide on we're doing feature A or B, who's had to consider the implications of a team member or an entire team being split in focus between one or more objectives, right? And that's where it gets really interesting, because you can adjust the simulation or get it to recalculate based on how much effort individual team members and teams are applying to the outcome. And that suddenly gets to shift around in terms of what interventions I'm going to make to get something to be a bit closer to the delivery date. Because usually when you're looking at this stuff, it's because you've got a concern that this isn't going to hit the date. And we provide the tools for you to model what changes need to happen so it can hit the date.
Okay, that's a good in depth of it. I'll pick you up on something else you talked about before. You talked about flow and value, and that brings us to value stream maps and value stream management, etc. And I think that's a probably important thing to start having a chat about. And I can see John smiling about it because it's one of his favourites. So we might let him run off first, Arushi, and then we'll pick up the pieces afterwards. Let's start with that value. Why is that important, John? Why is that important from a leader's point of view that Flowmatika can show you, or any of these predictive models? You can use the value stream modeling.
Well, look, if I was to talk a little bit about flow, which, by the way, if you're watching, hi Nigel. Just a quick nod to Nigel Thurlow there. I think what we kind of need to delineate between is, if we want to talk about a true and idealized robust flow system, that is the thing that most organizations should probably try and get themselves towards. That is likely going to look quite different to what the average organization is likely to achieve in the next couple of years. If we're to call a spade, they're two different end states. We just hope and should be working towards it, not the second one not being an end state. But when we talk about, the target situation for having a really sophisticated value stream management context in an organization, and we lean back into some of those things that we have already learned for decades upon decades, when you talk about Toyota manufacturing and things like that, there's that component, but there's kind of what I've noticed, at least in my conversations with the broader market, particularly since coming into the role, the middle ground, or the thing that people are just trying to get to at the moment, that we're not ready for conversations like that, because the connection with the existing data sets that most people are using just isn't there. What most people are trying to get to, and I'll speak carefully because it's not the words that they use, but it's the meaning they're implying, is you've got these leaders and executives who essentially want the level of fidelity and understanding of what's happening in a delivery system that they are accustomed to in a sales team, in a call center, in all these other functions of the business where you're used to having quite a lot of data points to be able to leverage and use to understand different situations rapidly. And that's absent right now for a lot of people, or being actively argued about. So it's kind of like your first stop on the journey is probably going to be getting to something like that before you can use that as a foundation for an ongoing discussion. The second thing I'd say about that is there's a limitation in containing this discussion just to the delivery system. Often people who are making the most influential decisions about projects are not delivery aficionados. They're people who are making an investment on behalf of their functional vertical in the organization, and they're dealing with projects because that's what they need to move the needle. So if you're going to obfuscate the value and the intention of a lot of flow metrics behind jargon, then you can expect to have an uphill battle or need to do a lot of education, which ultimately slows down your adoption and slows down their journey to getting something valuable out of it.
Okay, I want to dig deeper into flow metrics, as I said before. I'll circle back around to that as well, because that's a bit of a subject on its own right. But Arushi, I think John's talked a lot about the why, but what about the how? How does Flowmatika let you see the value stream in its interfaces and the way it imports the information?
So what Flowmatika does is it allows organizations, when they plug into Flowmatika, to define what value means to them. What's their definition of value towards their business and organization. And then it reflects those value streams either through organizational hierarchies or verticals that you have. It reflects what's the state of play within those value streams. What's if we it's from the point of view either looking at value streams for marketing, or value streams of sales, or value streams within delivery. What means to you can be reflected through Flowmetrics within Flowmatica's environment. It'll show you the data that you need in order to optimize those value streams, manage them well, manage your upstreams and downstreams of your value streams. Look at your lead times, how quickly you're getting the work done, or looking at how much time you're spending, or where are your efforts going, in which areas of your business your efforts are going. So it helps bring all that information to the surface and helps you see or understand the situation, which is hiding behind those numbers, by looking at either the indicators or looking at, for example, looking at the distribution of your work within the value streams, where you're spending most of your time, where you're putting most of your efforts. What are you focusing on right now? Are you focusing more on your giving value to your customers towards your business, or are you focusing more of your time towards just fixing what you've already done? So it brings that narrative up to the surface, and it makes it easier for executives. It makes it easier for managers and delivery managers to look at that data and have a sense or get an intuition of, or validate their intuition of what's happening.
So I want to dig a bit deeper into the flow metrics, because you both mentioned it, which would be obvious if you're talking about value streams. You need to be able to measure. But what I'm really interested, so I'm not going to dig so much into the types of them, but it's more about, where are flow metrics going? They've started to evolve a bit, and what does this mean to the platforms and to executives that are looking at these metrics, John?
I think that's kind of coming back to what I was saying earlier around, you can't contain this stuff to delivery. Like, it is a significant parcel of value to be able to understand, say, the end-to-end lead time of a project, if you're not used to looking at that. I am, because I look at Flowmatica all the time, so that is a shameless plug. But, if that's something that you don't have right now, you've made a step towards a more valuable state, because, okay, you understand, if I ask for a thing from my delivery teams, I know how long I get it. But when you want to start look at things around, like, you're really trying to optimize how the organization runs, and you want to try and leverage that to achieve your strategy faster, your checkpoints aren't when things hit delivery and when they leave delivery. Your checkpoints is from business case to benefit. And I think that's kind of something that Flowmetrics are not doing broadly enough and in an accessible enough way right now. Spoiler alert, that's a concern for myself, and something you can expect Flowmatica to address over time. But I think that's sort of like, it is a logical conclusion that, if this stuff is proving valuable, it assists in making decisions across multiple levels of an organization. Like, you would need a way to rationalize and aggregate that across the organization horizontally, rather than just, containing it to that delivery space. To do that, though, and I touched on this a little bit earlier as well, you've got to detach a little bit from some of the dogma around, like, the jargon you use, and, like, you're going to have to find more common parlance ways to have these conversations, because someone shouldn't have to become a black belt Six Sigma to enter a basic discussion with you around when the thing's going to be delivered, or when it's going to hit that call center team, or when it's going to be ready for marketing. Like, you kind of need to have a bit more common sense around how you're going to hold those discussions. And that should even reflect in how you're depicting the data points and the insights.
Arushi, I guess, you've been doing this for some time, obviously, with Flowmatica, and you're seeing a lot of the flow metrics, and you're seeing the use of the flow metrics. So my question to you is, what's the flow metric that startles people the most when they see the result from Flowmatica? So I think that's the interesting one, because there's a number of them, right? But I'm sure that when you put it in front of people, they go, oh my God.
One of the super hit, I think, is looking at your sources of delay and waste. People are not expecting that that's where the waste was, because often, most of the time, organizations want to make their delivery time, lead times or delivery times better, and things that impact that are your delays, are your sources of where's your delay happening, what's causing that to be slower than anticipated. And Flowmatika brings layers to that information. It's not just telling you here's your waste, it's telling you there are 3 different places that you can look at, you can optimize. If you start even pulling one lever up, looking at your top waiting, like things that where your work spends most of the waiting time, optimizing that, or looking at how much of the work you're throwing away, you're starting work and then throwing away to no value. You're wasting the money there, you're throwing money out there. That becomes like, oh wow, that's I knew that was happening, but not that much, or that seems correct, or that wow, we need to make efforts towards that. Another thing that has been much loved is the predictability aspect of it. So how predictable are my systems? So this is what I think. This is how far this. I think that the work we'll get the feature out in like by the end of next month. But the predictability shows you otherwise, and that's where I was initially telling you that it helps you correct yourself towards or compare your fantasy world to actually what is happening in your system, and brings that all to light and helps you take informed decisions based on that value that you get.
Brilliant. So I said I wasn't going to talk too much about Flowmetrics, but I think I have to tackle the one that perturbs me the most, or the most often it's not used well, or and it is one of John's favorite, and it's lead time. Let's talk about lead time. Why is that a metric that seems to be so widely misconstrued? And then, as part and parcel of that, what have we done at Flowmatica to sort of bring that to a head, John?
I think I'm not sure about, at least personally, not sure around misconstrued in terms of what it's meant to be. I mean, I do find it a little bit hilarious that when you have a discussion with a delivery professional around lead time, they always want to clarify the lead time from the point it enters my system, or the lead time that executives approved it, or a lead time that the customer's requested for it. It's like, I think that
the lead time being on the salesman's time.
yeah, right. Like,
there's always a different point of start for the lead times, that it's smaller enough or not bigger enough to scare people off.
I see. Exactly. I've touched the point.
But that's the thing. Like, it actually, it goes to show the distance you kind of need to travel for some of this stuff to stick with companies. Because, if you go and have a conversation around someone that has a KPI due in the next 6 months, and you say, hey, were you aware that the average lead time for one of your projects to be delivered is like 6 years? Like, all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, that's confronting because I'm expecting this thing in 2 months. Like, and I think there's sort of like, there's a lot of concern that comes up around that. But when you look at, especially when you're looking at a lead time on an average, you're got to consider that stuff in context. Like, in some of these delivery systems, you've got all these work items, and like some of them are these language projects that have just been sitting in a team and not being worked on like year after year because no one's decided that it's not something we're going to do. We're definitely going to do it. We're just going to do it in roughly the next century. And these things will have impacts. Flowmatica does give you like sort of functions and like little tools and doodads to be able to, interpret that stuff relatively well. But it is one of those things where it's like, I kind of think of it like people get a cold bucket of water on them when they first like bring their data in and have a look at it, because it's like, oh, everything is so broken. It's like, well, yeah, there's probably a lot broken because you've never looked at this stuff and never managed to it before. So that's to be expected. But there is probably also some elements here that aren't as broken as you think. Let's have a look.
Your thoughts, Arushi? I can see you had their thoughts on it as well. And I noticed I touched a nerve there. For
Yeah,
everybody.
I mean, see, we've noticed that when we started out, when we built about the feature of lead time, or presented the lead time, there were always different requirements that came through, which reflected what organizations want to look at when they're looking at the lead time. Some want to be like take into consideration whether include weekends into your lead time calculations or not, because there are 2 days of the week that adds up of doing no work, but that's adding to your calculation of your lead time. Then also considering something that John and I were looking at, talking about the end-to-end lead time, which is what we were talking about. That where should we start? Should we start from the point, that idea that things came into the system? We started from the idea, from when the customer requested it, or from when we started working on it, or somewhere in the middle? Where should that point start in? And while there's no right answer to it, visibility at every level or every stage of that lead time becomes important to understanding how long you are actually taking. Like, how long does it take for you to bring an idea into your set of value that you want to deliver, and then you're bringing it out or sending it out there and putting it to delivery, and then delivering it completely? Like, what's the journey, and how long is it going to take? Would you need to consider your weekends? Would your scenario need to consider the discovery aspect of things before you commit to working on those things? Your triaging process, your upstream lead time, is it important towards it? Because that also highlights the efficiency of your system. Are you spending more time on your upstream, or are you spending more time on your downstream? So that visibility at every stage then becomes important. It can be scary, because sometimes things, like John said, your lead times might reflect that it's going to take years to finish it. Maybe not years sometimes, but more number of days than your system. Your system reflects that it's going to take more number of days because that's how it's been in your delivery system. But in reality, you want it to be done sooner. What optimizations you need to do, at which stage, at which point of your stages of your delivery cycle, to be able to finish it in your desired time. That visibility becomes important then.
I'm glad I picked lead time, by the way. I'm going to take a little right-hand turn and throw this one out. I guess the question a lot of people are asking around data and data platforms and predicting the future of data is, where does AI sit in this? Because generative AI has become such a powerful entity just recently. And you juxtaposition that against any of these platforms, Flowmatika or whatever it might be. How do we see the effect? How do we see the use of that, John?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Like, the application of generative AI, let's go for the low-hanging fruit. It can be, with some modification, a reasonable interface for someone that doesn't understand how to do sophisticated queries to get more interesting information or custom information out of a data set. And that's something that we've already done some internal testing around, and it's been really, really successful. Where I think it gets a bit more interesting, though, is you have an ability for your continuous improvement side of this conversation to become a lot more autonomous and self-guided. Whenever you see these metrics crop up in a given instance, like, you might have a look at your lead time. Let's pick on that one again. If that's gone backwards and it's not trending in a direction that you want, and you start observing that in certain areas of your delivery. I'll pick on the discovery kind of period. Just quick tip for anyone that's watching: the space before things hit development and after the business case has been approved, that space is probably the easiest place to save time in your overall lead time for your project, because it's usually a lot of human and relationship issues that just need to be clarified and reset. And
if that's where you're such a lead time from, John.
Oh yeah, sorry, that's right. If we're just not counting that, then fine. Yeah, no, I understand. My bad. There's a lot of high leverage stuff you can probably do there in the average delivery system that's going to be useful and save you some time. But that besides, when you talk about that space and maybe you just want to have a quick list of interventions that you might be able to perform, that's something that when provided the right advice is available to an LLM, that's something that it can actually produce, and it will be contextual and relevant to the challenges you're facing at that point in time. The big caveat against that is the data in any of these tools is not, like, it doesn't account for a lot of the things that you're not capturing and providing it as input, right? If you aren't really having a sophisticated way of showing, like, there's this impediment between team A and team B, and that's one of the things that been clogging up the waste. If you're not capturing that level of fidelity, then the system's only going to know that there is a blockage there. It's not going to know why, so its advice is probably going to be a bit more broad and not as specific. Might still suggest that you go and query some of those things, but it's not going to be able to give you a really sophisticated answer if it doesn't have really sophisticated context to draw from.
Yeah. It only gets as powerful as it does, as much context you give it. Like, AI is super powerful. Like John said, we did few testing and things were quite remarkable, like really, really interesting. But it really depends. There's only so much that the basic data that it can work with, or its knowledge base is limited. It can only be made better or more sophisticated, more clear of what you want, what clear insights that you want. It can only be made through more context that you can give to that situation, things that have not been captured through numbers or calculations or any other way.
One thing I'd actually add to, sorry.
No, you go. You go, John. Go. Yeah.
The one thing that I'd actually add to that is, and it's sort of a spooky way to put it, but generative AI applied to these kinds of performance diagnosis platforms probably doesn't the way that I'd frame it is it does a lot more than what you'd think. It actually gets you a lot closer to a reasonable list of interventions to make, with a pretty high level of clarity and detail around how to execute them and what some of the pitfalls are. Like, it actually, when it's set up and contextualized appropriately and it refers to things accurately, it is actually very, very close to what you would usually need to hire in external expertise for.
Yeah.
Very good. I was going to say that the minute one of those chatbots asks me if I know Sarah Connor, though, you'll find me in the hills somewhere, right? So, sorry, I had to get my Terminator reference.
What's the lead time in making it to the hills?
Yeah, well, it'll be more about the cycle time, I can tell you, the time I get cycled off. All right, enough of the data geek jokes. Look, we're really right at the end of our time. And it's been fantastic having you. I think I've got one quick question I want to ask. What's next for Flowmatika? I think that's the thing. We've heard quite a bit about where Flowmatika is at, what it's doing. What's next for Flowmatika? Start with you, John.
I'll probably talk I'll probably talk about the more boring stuff. Arushi's probably got the more interesting things to say, but when I said earlier that Flowmatika, like, the journey for talking about like what are flow metrics doing and like where's that stuff going, it pretty much aligns with my views of where Flowmatica is going. So when you're talking about, at the moment, we're in the delivery space, in the not too distant future, you can expect to be able to leverage the same tools, the same calculations across other areas of your business, like marketing and support, sales, that kind of thing. So that's a definite focus, as well as, we've already kind of put the gun on the mantle around the AI thing. We've had incredibly promising results, and we're aiming to get that at least in a beta version for some of our more enthusiastic customers to test in the next couple of months. So that's very much around the corner.
And your thoughts, Arushi?
Yeah, on the same lines. I mean, we're doing the same things, but we're trying to bring in this suite of capabilities within Flowmatica, AI being one of them, because you have to not that you have to jump on the trend, but that's the right path to go. That enables people, when we're talking about efficiency optimizations, that's one of the things that world is doing towards by leveraging AI, and we plan to do the same. Along with that, we aim to make Flowmatica continuously improve its narrative of how users can, in much better ways, they can, in sophisticated ways, that they can understand the data and the delivery systems in the States, and then also move into spectrums of connecting things into their strategy, or making that connecting delivery to strategy, which is, I think, more useful when you have the complete picture of how things are flowing from the top level all the way down, which we already have, but we're building on it further.
Brilliant. Well, look, we are at the end of our time, and it's been great to have you on the show with us. I'll defer to Arushi with this one. We always want to talk to the people who actually do the work. How can people get in touch with you? How can people touch base and find out more about predicting the future using your data, more about Flowmatica and many of the things we just talked about, Arushi?
Yeah, simple. Jump onto our website, www.flowmatica.com, and reach out to us through a book demo link that is right on the top corner of the page.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. All right, it's been excellent to have you both on. Thank you for being on at Talking Remote today. For those listening, don't forget remoteaf.co. Click the community button, join the community. We're talking about lots of these different things. It's a really vibrant community. Also, if you want to join our team newsletter, Teamcraft, you'll find the notes in the show notes, and you'll find anything that we've talked about today there. Once again, thanks, John. Thanks, Arushi. Thanks for being on at Talking Remote today.
Thanks, Tony.